Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everybody. We've got a really great show for you today, but things are a little bit different on this episode. You'll notice that I am flying semi-solo without my co-pilot, Nan. Nan had to fly back to Minnesota for a family emergency, so we certainly wish Nan and her family all the best, and we look forward to her return. But we decided to bring in a special co-host for this episode, and we didn't have to look too far, just across the room. We have with us today, Lindsay is going to step in for Nan, so welcome, Linz.
Thanks, buddy. I wouldn't call it a special co-star. I would say that at the very last minute, this is the best we could do without calling the 20 people who are probably very eager to step in and try and fill Nan's shoes.
Oh, are you kidding? We're happy to have you.
It's a great honor, and I'm going to do my level best to channel Ms. McNamara and contribute the best that I can.
Oh, good. We talked about this on the show before. One of my favorite films, and it's this nifty little film noir called Impact from 1949. It was directed by the prolific Arthur Lubin, who was this B-level director who gave us this very eclectic mix of films. I mean, he directed everything from thrillers like Phantom of the Opera in 1943, The Spider-Woman Strikes Back, 1946, and he even directed Maria Montez's exotic adventure films like White Savage in 1943 and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, 1944. And he also directed the great Irene Dunn's final film, which was a comedy called It Grows on Trees from 1952, which was this really underrated movie about the suburban housewife who discovers a tree in her backyard that grows money.
Such a cool idea. What's interesting to me is all of these titles that you've mentioned are to a T what you and Nan talked about in naming so many film noir films. Spider-Woman Strikes Back, White Savage. I mean, they're so cliche.
I know, and they're so similar to other titles, they're hard to differentiate.
Yeah.
Going back to Impact, it's the story of this unfaithful wife played by the always alluring Helen Walker, who we have actually featured on the show before. She plots with her lover, played by Tony Barrett, to kill her husband, who's played by the always reliable Brian Donlevy. Well, her lover gets killed instead, and the husband decides to remain dead and to start a new life in Idaho with a small-town girl played by the stunning Ella Raines, and he decides to let his wife take the rap for conspiracy to commit murder for her lover.
Talk about a comeuppance.
I know, and it's perfect. Well, it's a long and very engaging film that has all the great film noir elements. I mean, there's a world-weary hero who must defend his innocence. There's a beautiful but deadly femme fatale, and a good girl whose unyielding faith in our hero inspires her to play detective herself to clear her man's name once he returns and is accused of the lover's murder. Well, one of the great surprises of this film was the presence and the performance of Anna May Wong. She plays Sue Lin, the maid who hears all and sees all. Gotta love that. And because she had little to do in the first part of the film, when I watched the movie, I was afraid that, like so many other films in the past from Anna May Wong, that she was going to have very little to do and was going to be wasted. Well, I was wrong, because as the movie turns out, Sue Lin ends up saving the day by providing information to Ella Raines that ultimately sets Brian Donlevy free. She's the unsung hero of the film.
So not a lot of screen time, but a very key character.
Very key character. And as she's the unsung hero of this film, she's also kind of the unsung hero of film history, as she was a trailblazer for Asian actors in Hollywood.
I think that's fascinating that just in doing the research that I did starting a few days ago, I was amazed, and we're going to talk about this down the road, about the struggle that she went through so early in Hollywood history as an Asian woman. It's a sad, sad story. But
it is. is.
But
It is
she
sad.
really more than rose to the occasion.
Oh, she did. She did.
Now, something interesting that I discovered about you and me years ago is that when we both moved to California from other parts of the country, the first place we both lived in, not even knowing each other, was Long Beach.
Yes, absolutely.
Good old Long Beach.
Good old Long Beach.
Love that city so much and spent a lot of time in the South Bay, including Redondo and Manhattan and Hermosa. And those are the two first places that you lived, Long Beach and Redondo.
Yeah, when I first moved to California, I lived in Long Beach for a while, then Redondo Beach, and then I discovered Hollywood.
See, that was really intimidating to me.
Oh.
When I first moved here, Hollywood was like this
Yes.
scary, gritty place up north. It was fascinating to visit during the day, but if I wasn't back home by sunset, I was like, oh, this is creepy. Hollywood's scary.
And it was. I mean, Hollywood in the 1990s, I mean, it was still really, really rough. And while hordes of tourists were still parading around Hollywood Boulevard in those days, you know, they were more likely to see a drug deal go down or a prostitute fighting with another one over territory or even like a homeless person taking a crap on Meryl Streep's star than to see actual movie stars. But that was just the 90s in Hollywood. Well, my second apartment in Hollywood was the top floor of this once grand fleur-de-lis apartment building on Whitley Avenue. It's just a block off of Hollywood Boulevard between Hollywood and Franklin. The fleur-de-lis, it had a hint of elegance left. There were still like these beautiful chandeliers and these great features, but also there were bars on all the windows on the first floor. So
Right.
It was definitely decayed decadence.
I think you've referred to it in the past and said it's a little bit like the once beautiful actress who's fallen on hard times, and you can tell what she used to be and what
Yes.
she's become.
It's like Veronica Lake in the later years.
There you go.
Living in the fleur-de-lis was interesting because the on-site manager, she was this funny, really lovely older woman named Carol. And Carol was just fantastic when she was sober.
I was going to say, but there's a catch. Sounds like there's a catch.
I know on so many occasions I came home and found Carol like in the lobby arguing with somebody or trying to get out of a cab without paying.
Oh, dear Lord.
But I loved Carol. She was also the keeper of the secrets of the building, and she knew its history. In fact, the building had just been declared a historic building when I moved in, and Carol had access to all the rental records dating back to 1930 when the building actually opened, which was really cool to kind of go through these files with her.
And a lot of big names had stayed there in early Hollywood?
They did. As we were going through the files, we found out that Janet Blair used to live there and John Wayne lived there
Holy
briefly.
moly.
And you guessed it, Anna May Wong lived there. But not only did she live in the building, Lens, she actually lived in my apartment.
Now that is crazy.
I know, which is why I think I have a special place in my heart for Anna May Wong.
Sure. So you saw her name and apartment
Yep.
number.
Her
on the
contract
record.
had the apartment number, which was my apartment
And
number.
did you feel flush or chills when you saw the numbers match?
Oh, are you kidding? For a cinephile like me, that was thrilling. So I
That's so
loved
cool.
knowing that I was living in her apartment.
Yeah.
So never saw any ghosts. I wish I had, but it was a great building, a great time.
Very cool.
So Anna May Wong will be our Star of the Month this month. So we're excited to talk about her and her life and her career.
So for those who may not be familiar with Anna May Wong, she was born on Flowers Street near the Chinatown area of Los Angeles. That was January 3rd, 1905. She was a third-generation American from Toisanese Chinese-American parents. Her mother and father were hardworking people. They actually worked in a laundry that they opened on North Figueroa. Anna May, whose birth name was Wong Leo Song, which literally means frosted yellow willows.
Oh, how nice.
Isn't that cool? Was always fascinated by the movies. In fact, in the 1910s, many motion pictures were being shot in and around Chinatown, and that gave Anna May a first-hand look at what film production was really like. She would even skip school to watch filming, and at a very early age, she, like so many young people, decided they wanted to be a movie star, and that's exactly what she said. So when a casting call came in 1919, think about that.
Wow.
They were looking for Chinese extras in the Alla Nazimova film The Red Lantern. Anna May wasted no time in signing up. Now, her parents were not crazy about this idea. I think they probably, and I'm surmising here, they pictured her working in the laundry, continuing
Totally.
the family business.
Or marrying and having children like a good girl.
Exactly. But what's this actor nonsense? You don't want to do that. Well, she lands an uncredited role as a girl simply carrying a lantern.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
Everybody does. But she said, looking back on that day, quote, "I felt sure that I'd see my name in electric lights before long." Which just sounds like so many people who aspire from a young age that they can visualize themselves, their name on a billboard, on a movie screen, that they have that gift or curse of visualizing themselves down the road being wildly successful.
Yeah, and I think Hollywood just was like this siren song that just called them in, like moths to a flame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anna May's first significant role came when she was only 17 years old. She was cast in The Toll of the Sea in 1922, which was a silent version of Madame Butterfly. It was a notable production because it was one of the first films shot in color.
That's amazing.
I know, in 1922, amazing. It was only 2 strips of color, red and green, but it was color just the same. Quite historic on that front. Well, in The Toll of the Sea, she played Lotus Flower, the beautiful young Chinese girl with whom an American visitor, played by Kenneth Harlan, falls in love despite their love being taboo. You can imagine it was a tragic love story, and yet Anna May was not allowed to kiss her male co-star because she was Chinese and he was Caucasian.
Now, was this pre-Hays Code?
This was pre-Hays Code.
Okay.
And the Hays Codes put this in effect, but there were state laws already in effect at the time that prevented people from different races kissing.
Good grief.
Which was crazy. They called them these anti-miscegenation laws that forbade this. Well, this would become an ongoing theme in her entire career. I mean, despite her beauty and her allure, she often was passed over for romantic leading roles because she couldn't kiss a white man on screen, which was so frustrating for her, I'm sure. So instead, she often got cast as these mysterious women, often wicked women, or she had to play the maid or slave. Not a lot of opportunities for decent parts for an Asian woman back then.
So 2 years after The Toll of the Sea, she makes a strong impact opposite Douglas Fairbanks, can you believe that, in the Raoul Walsh-directed version of The Thief of Baghdad. That was 1924, which was written by Fairbanks. Now, in this film, she played the Mongol slave girl, who's this scheming creature who tries to keep Fairbanks and his true love, Julian Johnston, apart. Now, once again, Anna May gets cast as the mysterious villainess, but she manages to hold her own in this film against one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and this is where a lot of people agree that she showed real acting prowess. She also managed to imbue some humanity and depth into what otherwise would have been a very stereotypical role, which again was testament to her talent.
And by now, she was developing an actual fan base, which was cool, and she's determined to fight for better and less stereotypical roles at this point. And in 1924, she starts her own production company, Anna May Wong Productions.
I think that's fascinating because, and again, testament to her stick-to-itiveness, her willingness to work hard, because it was hard enough for her just to be cast as an Asian woman, but to actually, in 1924, start her own production company. I mean, that had to be unheard of back then.
Yeah, well, she was one of the first women to ever do it. And her goal for doing this was she really wanted to produce material that showed Asians in a more realistic light. And she once remarked, and this is a quote, "Why is it that the screen Chinese is always the villain? And such a crude villain, murderous, treacherous, a snake in the grass. We are not like that."
Like so many things you and Ann have talked about in this podcast, it's just amazing to me that you even have to say that.
I know. It's so true.
But
so
she's spot on. And I think a lot of America back then didn't give that a second thought. It was just, well, that's what a Chinese character is in a film. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me.
It really is. Unfortunately, before Anna May Wong and her production company could actually produce anything, she discovered her business partner had been dipping in the till a little bit. She ended up suing him, and the company ended up closing, which is a shame.
So in the late 20s, early 30s, Hollywood was becoming increasingly fascinated with Asian culture. But roles for Chinese actors were still very limited. Now, Anna May continued to spend a great deal of her early career playing, cliche prostitutes, dragon ladies, slave girls. These were all very sexualized objects of men's desire. And to her credit, she soon grew tired of that. And those were the roles that she was being offered in Hollywood. And very wisely, she thought, forget this.
Right.
And maybe a change of location would help. And she goes to Europe. And there, she was received with a lot of fanfare. She became a big deal. She appeared in several notable plays and films, and it was an artistically fulfilling time for her. She had one of her most significant roles in a 1929 film called Piccadilly, where she plays a dishwasher who becomes a star. And Europe was really, really good to her. She just flourished there. She made films in England and France and Germany. And not only was she an incredibly attractive woman, but producers were amazed when they discovered that Anna May spoke not only English and Chinese, but also fluent in French, German, and Italian. 5 languages.
I know, she was a smart cookie to boot. I've actually seen Piccadilly, and it's really hard to find it. It's such a good performance. I mean, you really see the star power in her in this movie.
That's so cool.
Yeah. She was still hoping to be offered better roles after her time in Europe when she returned to America. And based on the strength of her performance in Piccadilly, she was placed under contract at Paramount Pictures. They cast her in some pretty stereotypical roles in movies like Daughter of the Dragon, 1931. But she did receive excellent notices for her portrayal of a fellow prostitute and confidant of Marlene Dietrich in the Joseph von Sternberg directed film Shanghai Express in 1932. But she was back to playing prostitute.
But at least this time a higher level. This was considered more A picture than B picture.
And she's with Marlene Dietrich. You know, it didn't get any bigger than her back then. Actually, Anna May and Marlene Dietrich became really fast friends, and their friendship caused a lot of people in Hollywood to raise an eyebrow or two, thinking that it might be more than a friendship.
Isn't that fascinating? Even back then.
But I've done a lot of research on her, and I've never found any corroborating information to support that maybe she and Dietrich were more than friends. So who knows?
Yeah.
You know, both were strong, independent women who lived by their own rules. So I'm sure people back then, they didn't know what to make of these women.
Couldn't wrap their brains around it. Now, romantically, Anna May had her share of suitors. In Chinese culture, women who worked as actresses were often viewed as being no better, get this, than a prostitute.
Ouch.
And a lot of Chinese men shied away from Anna May as a result of that. Most of her relationships and affairs were with older white men who often worked in the film industry. In fact, she was once linked romantically to the English writer Eric Maschwitz. He was an Oscar-nominated screenwriter for Goodbye, Mr. Chips, 1939. And after their relationship ended, he wrote the song These Foolish Things Remind Me of You, which everybody knows was performed by Billie Holiday. And it's long been speculated that he was inspired to write that song because of his lingering affection for Anna May.
During the early 1930s, a very frustrated Anna May Wong sought to take control of her career by creating a cabaret act that she performed worldwide. And her act included songs in Cantonese and French and English and German and Swedish and Dutch and all these different languages. This only helped further elevate her star status globally. But despite being the most famous Chinese woman in the world, an international celebrity, and a fashion icon, she still could not kiss a white man on camera or buy a house in Beverly Hills or marry outside her own race.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. It's interesting to me that America would not give her the respect that Europe seemed to embrace. Her multicultural abilities. I mean, they just saw that as such an asset. And Hollywood was like,
We've always been so puritanical and behind the times.
Well, we have a lot more to cover on Anna May Wong, but my goodness, look at the time. So first, I think it's time for Steve, this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz. What you got?
All right. And it's about Anna May Wong. In 1994, she was immortalized in this, only way I can describe it is god-awful gazebo-like statue called Four Ladies of Hollywood that sits on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and La Brea Avenue in Hollywood. In fact, the LA Times art critic Christopher Knight called it, at the time of its installation, the most depressingly awful work of public art in recent memory. So the question is, who are the other 3 actresses immortalized in this sculpture alongside Anna May Wong? And you get bonus points if you can tell me who designed the statue, and even more bonus points if you can tell me who was the actress who was once featured on top of this monstrosity and what happened to her statue.
Wow. I remember the first time I drove by that and was literally drop-jawed, like, what the hell is that?
It's hideous.
The answer to that at the end of the show. But first, this break. Stick around.
Hey, Nan here. Stephen Linz will be right back, but first, another stop on the Hollywood tour. Back in 1882, the federal government created something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Many Americans on the West Coast attributed declining wages and economic ills to Chinese workers, even though the Chinese composed only 0.002% of the nation's population. Nevertheless, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act to placate worker demands and assuage concerns about maintaining white racial purity. Now, originally, it prohibited the immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years, but the act was extended until it was officially repealed in 1943 through the Magnuson Act. That law required all Chinese residents in the United States to carry certificates of identity issued by the government. And even though Anna May Wong achieved fame as a Hollywood actor, she still had to carry one of those certificates with her everywhere she went. And now back to Stephen Linz from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. But before we get further into the life and career of Anna May Wong, we want to shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, we are honoring Jessica Smith from North Carolina. Jessica is a dedicated listener and a great supporter of the podcast. She recently wrote us with some really sad news about the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield, North Carolina, which I believe we've mentioned the museum a few times on the show in the past. Well, apparently the museum just lost a great deal of its funding that came from a government IMLS grant that was recently cut. Without this funding, the museum may be in trouble. So she let us know that if anybody wanted to help the museum, there's a link to make donations to help out. No amount is too small. I'm definitely planning to make a donation. So if anybody wants to help out the Ava Gardner Museum, we're going to put the link to where you can donate in our show notes. And we'll keep that up for several episodes.
See, I think that's one of the really cool things about what you and Nan have built. The ability to reach out to the people who are most interested in something like that, who are so generous.
Yeah.
And if all of those people made even a small donation,
yeah, well,
it would make a huge difference.
It's so important to preserve our film history and also the artifacts of our stars like Ava Gardner. So I love the work they've done there. I know several people have been to that museum and said it is spectacular. So we want to keep it open.
That is way cool.
Oh.
Continuing with the story of Anna May, her frustration continued to grow in Hollywood for a pretty simple reason. She continued to see white actresses cast in Asian roles, complete with, and this is cringy to say, yellow makeup and these ridiculous accents. So, for example, picture Loretta Young in The Hatchet Man, 1932, Myrna Loy in The Mask of Fu Manchu, also 1932, and even Helen Hayes, of all people, possibly the whitest woman to ever live, as Lien Hua in The Sun Daughter, also 1932. That must have been so difficult for Anna May to be that popular and to see these incredibly white women with yellow face makeup and these accents that almost sounded like they were just mocking Chinese people.
Yeah.
But to her credit, she continued to make films. She still wanted to work. So she worked with Poverty Row Studios, and although she was the lead in movies like 1934's Tiger Bay, 1934's Chu Chen Chow, which was a musical retelling of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, and Java Head, 1934. All of these B movies did not do much for her career.
Nope.
But despite that, she was hired by Paramount Studios to star alongside George Raft and Gene Parker, two huge names in the crime drama Limehouse Blues from 1934.
It must have been really tough for her to see all these Caucasian women playing these Asian roles, but her biggest heartbreak would soon happen when MGM bought the film rights to Pearl S. Buck's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Good Earth. Anna May begged Louis B. Mayer to let her play the wife, Olan, and after all, The Good Earth was this epic story of the trials and tribulations of a Chinese farmer and his faithful wife. Who better to play Olan than Anna May Wong?
Absolutely.
Well, Louis B. Mayer didn't think so. He refused to even consider her for the part, stating that white actor Paul Muni had already been cast as the husband, and again, she could not kiss him on screen, therefore she could not play the role. Instead, he gave the part to Austrian actress Louise Reiner, which is atrocious, but anyway, we'll get into that. But as a consolation prize, he did offer Anna May the role of Lotus. Of course, she's the home-wrecking, tea-house dancing woman who seduces Olan's husband and becomes his second wife. But Wong refused. And as she said at the time, and this is a quote, "You're asking me with Chinese blood to do the only unsympathetic role in a picture featuring an all-American cast portraying Chinese characters."
Good for her.
Yeah. Well, to add insult to injury, Louise Reiner ended up winning the Best Actress Oscar in 1937 for the role.
God, like it didn't suck enough.
Yeah.
Well, she was understandably devastated by this, especially by that Oscar going to Louise. So she was bound and determined that she was going to leave Hollywood. And that's exactly what she did. She actually went back to China for a whole year and just immersed herself in life back there. She stayed with her family. She hung out with friends. She was surprised, though, that even back in China, she was criticized by the press there for playing stereotypical roles, which to me is like adding insult to injury. She's been railing to change that in America, taking these roles because she needs to work, wants to work, and she gets lambasted by the press in her home country. But because of who she was, she managed to charm a lot of people in China, and she became a pretty big deal in that country, her ancestral country. In fact, she was the closest thing that China had to a movie star.
She has a great quote about this in an interview she gave one time, and she said about that very thing you're talking about, she said, "It's a pretty sad situation to be rejected by Chinese because I'm too American, and by American producers because they prefer other races to act Chinese parts."
That's just amazing. That's just incredible.
Terrible. Well, when she returned to America, she was cast in the lead of what would probably turn out to be one of her best-known films, Daughter of Shanghai, 1937, which also featured the wonderful Asian actor Philip Ahn. It's a really great movie, and in this one, Anna May really gets to show what she's capable of. She plays the daughter of a murdered antiques importer who sets out to find his killer. The role, it's emotionally challenging, and she gets to sing and dance seductively. She even gets to disguise herself as a man. Talk about acting. Flexibility. It is also and this is interesting, it's the very first time in film history where you had two Asian actors playing romantic leads.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but it's a beautiful performance. If you ever get a chance to see Daughter of Shanghai, it's really, really good.
That's impressive to me that happened as early as 1937.
Yeah.
Considering what she had gone through up to that point.
All the stumbling blocks in the way. Yeah.
Well, because of the success of that film, Daughter of Shanghai, Paramount, it being Hollywood, quickly threw her into a succession of similar films. Unfortunately, they weren't nearly as good. Now, despite being the lead in 1939's King of Chinatown, Dangerous to Know, and Island of Lost Men, all three of those films, 1939, these films were, quite frankly, just forgettable. These films did nothing to help her career or inspire her creativity. In fact, understandably, she was really disillusioned with Hollywood, and it was becoming harder and harder for her to hide that disillusionment. And in fact, in interviews, she was really blunt about her frustration over the limited rules that were being given to Asians.
Yeah. Well, when World War II broke out, she basically abandoned her career and devoted her time to the war effort for China. She made a couple of films during that time, Bombs Over Burma in 1942 and Lady from Chongqing in 1942 also. Both of these films were sort of pro-United States propaganda films that tried to boost the morale of the troops. She donated her salary for both films to the war effort relief. She didn't work in films again until she made Impact in 1949, which is the film we talked about at the top of the show.
So now it's 1951, and like so many people in Hollywood with film background, she turns her sights to television, which is a natural evolution.
Just makes sense. Yeah.
So she becomes the first Asian American to star in her own TV series. I think that's just amazing. The show was called The Gallery of Madame Liu Tsong. It was a detective series, but it was specifically written for her. And
How cool is that?
Isn't that neat? She played the title role and even used her birth name, which I think is really cool. Her character was a dealer in Chinese art whose career involved her using detective work and international intrigue. It was a really good show. Unfortunately, it lasted only one season.
Now, in 1956, she hosted one of the first U.S. documentaries on China, which was narrated entirely by Chinese Americans. It was broadcast on the ABC travel series Bold Journey, and it consisted of film footage from her 1936 trip to China. Well, she also continued to work in television, doing guest spots on shows such as I Spy, Adventures in Paradise, The Barbara Stanwyck Show, Mike Hammer, and The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp.
That's really cool. She appeared in one final film. That was in 1960. She returned to the screen to play the character of Tawny, who was a faithful maid to Lana Turner in that overwrought suspense drama Portrait in Black that was produced by Ross Hunter and co-starred Sandra Dee and Anthony Quinn. So again, surrounded by some really A-list stars. This was a cinematic swan song for her. And unfortunately, she seemed to kind of go out with a thud. Again, cast as a stereotypical character, just a reminder of so many other roles that she had played. And it really does, Steve, make you wonder if she just got tired of fighting. She had been doing this, butting her head up against the same wall for decades.
At what point do you just give up?
Yeah, and you can't blame her, although it does make me think that she probably deserves a lot of credit for work that eventually got Asian actors to where they ended up in
Without
Hollywood.
a doubt.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it took its toll, and she was drinking too much. She was having trouble with her money. Her health was failing. She was scheduled to play that Madame Liang role in the film production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Flower Drum Song, 1961, which might have put some steam back into her career, but we mentioned her health was really becoming an issue, and unfortunately, she had to drop out of the film.
Yeah. And this was really the beginning of the end for Anna May. And on February the 3rd, 1961, at the age of 56, she ended up dying of a heart attack as she slept at home in Santa Monica. Her cremated remains were interred in her mother's grave at Rosedale Cemetery in Los Angeles. The headstone is marked with her mother's anglicized name on top and the Chinese names of both Anna May and her sister Mary along the sides. Anna may be gone, but she's certainly not forgotten. She did receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960, becoming the very first Asian woman to do so. Sadly, she would be the only Asian woman with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame until 2019 when Lucy Liu was honored.
So that's almost 60 years between Asian actresses getting a star.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me.
It really is. But today, Anna May Wong is remembered as a trailblazer and sort of a cultural icon. She really paved the way for generations of Asian and Asian American actors by proving that talent and perseverance could transcend racist casting conventions. She's become a lasting symbol of resistance and representation. Her legacy has seen a resurgence in recent years, inspiring documentaries and academic studies, and even being honored on a U.S. currency.
I thought this was amazing.
I know. She became the first Asian American to appear on a U.S. quarter in 2022. I have a couple.
Of course you do.
Looking back on her, her life and her career, it continues to influence conversations, I think, about diversity and representation and even the politics of race in Hollywood. She certainly left her mark on Hollywood.
It's certainly interesting that despite the fact that she, as I said, had butted her head against that wall for decades, that Hollywood has made huge strides in terms of bringing people of color into so many on-camera positions. It's also sort of a, how far have we really come?
Yeah.
We've come far, but nowhere near far enough.
Nowhere near far enough.
And she is testament to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Steve, it's time for the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz. Am I right?
It is. And the question was, in 1994, she was immortalized in the structure Four Ladies of Hollywood, which is on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and La Brea Avenue in Hollywood. And who were the other three women who were also honored on this god-awful structure?
Hit us. Tell us the names.
It was Dolores Del Rio, Mae West, and Dorothy Dandridge, who designed the structure. They actually took bids, and several people could bid on designs, and the winning bid went to famed production designer Catherine Hardwicke.
Okay.
She ended up designing that. The original structure also featured another actress on top of the gazebo-like structure, and that was Marilyn Monroe. But unfortunately, sometime in, I think, 2019, some crazy man climbed on top of the structure and sawed off Marilyn and took her away, and she has never been seen since.
Someone's going to find that in a garage in a couple of years, and it's going to be...
You know it. Well, I found out that the guy who did it, because they did catch him, and I think he got sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he never told them where Maryland was. He's also the same guy that took a pickaxe to Donald Trump's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Wow.
So he has a little history of destroying things in Hollywood.
That guy gets around. Please follow us on social media if you would. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook. You can even watch the show on YouTube. And as always, we would not object to you giving this pod a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.
And we love hearing from you. Please keep those emails coming. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
Dan will be back next week. That's this week's View.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap. Helen Hayes, possibly the whitest woman to ever walk the streets of Hollywood as... That sounds terrible.
I love the street walking Helen
Street
Hayes.
walking hooker with a heart of gold, Helen Hayes. Dear God.
The first lady of theater we have just destroyed.
Yeah, I can see why people are going to want Nan back. Let me try that again.